It was called the Chantry, from having in former times been in the possession of certain monks. It is contiguous to the churchyard of Berkeley Castle, and the tower of St. Mary's Church overhangs the southern boundary of the shrubbery.
The River Severn cuts through the English county of Gloucestershire, linking Bristol in the south with Gloucester. The Vale of Berkeley lies on the south bank of the river, between the two cities.
January 1823. My dear William, I hear by your father that you will return in a few days to Bristol. Be assured you will take with you my best wishes and affections. I am happy to certify that no boy could behave better than you did during your stay with me at the Chantry. Pursue this line of good conduct, and you will be happy yourself, and make your father and everyone who loves you happy too. Your affectionate uncle, E.J.
This painting don't belong here. I'd remember an expensive piece like this. It would look more at home inside Berkeley Castle. It's inscribed with the name Wortley Montague. I've heard that name before somewhere. Now, I don't remember there being a Turkish lantern clock in the hallway.
Were your interviews for a new housemaid fruitful, Mrs. Knight?
Yes, madam. Both girls were hard-working and from respectable families, but only the Jones girl has had the pox, and plenty of scars to prove it.
Then you must select her. I will not risk the health of my family.
The condition of a servant would be too severe were they not allowed some time which they may call their own. In all well-governed families, a maid-servant has the liberty every Sunday, or every other Sunday, of going to church. If she neglects it, it discovers she has little sense of true religion, and may well be suspected of failing in her duty to an earthly master and mistress, when she fails in that to her Maker.
Respectable families expect their pound of flesh from domestic servants. Apples from the doctor's garden. More comfort than I'm used to, but I can't put my feet up now. Another cupboard. I'll have to try a different way. That's just a cupboard. There's no way through here. The lady of the house had good taste in furniture. The lady of the house had good taste in furniture. A painting by the Doctor's nephew, Stephen. Some relation of the Jenner family, no doubt.
So felt the towering soul of Montague, her sex's glory and her country's too, who gave the spotted plague one deadly blow, and bade its mitigated poison flow. With half its terrors, yet with loathing still, we housed the visitant with power to kill. Then, when the healthful blood, though often tried, foiled the keen lancet by the Severn side, resisting uncontaminated still, the purple pest and unremitting skill. When the plain truth tradition seemed to know, and simply pointed to the harmless cow, doubt and distrust to reason might appeal. But when hope triumphed, what did Jenner feel?
He was dining with a party at Bath when a question arose whether the temperature was highest in the centre of a candle flame or at some small distance from its apex. Jenner, with his usual ingenuity and readiness, soon settled the dispute. He placed the candle before him, inserting his finger into the middle of the flame. He retained it in this situation for a short time. He then placed it a little above the flame, but was compelled immediately to withdraw it. "There, gentlemen," he observed, "the question is settled."
Not the greatest painting, must have had some sentimental value. Not the greatest painting, must have had some sentimental value.
He could also play on the violin and flute, and he was in the habit of forming musical parties. I have seen him in his later years, after his renown had filled the world, and many cares had weighed heavy upon him, shake them entirely off and take up a humorous strain as he sang one of his own ballads with all the mirth and gaiety of his youthful days.
The Doctor cut an impressive figure in his youth. A beautiful countryside scene. I think that was his brother, or maybe his father. The Doctor had a lot of paintings, but I never figured out who all the artists were. That's the Doctor. His eyes follow you round the room. That's the Doctor. His eyes follow you round the room.
I have entrusted a most important matter to you, which I firmly believe will prove of essential benefit to the human race. I should not wish what I have stated to be brought into conversation, for should anything untoward happen, I should be made, particularly by my medical brethren, the subject of ridicule, for I am the mark they all shoot at.
On Thursday last at 2 o'clock, a balloon was launched from the inner court of Berkeley Castle. which rose to a very great height and was visible for a quarter of an hour. The same afternoon, it was seen to descend in a field in the parish of Kingscote, about 10 miles from Berkeley.
A small quantity of the serum of human blood was poured over about a square foot of grass. 3 sprinklings were given at the distance of a fortnight each, amounting to the serum contained in 40 ounces of blood. The effects it has produced on the vegetation of the grass is astonishing. It is beautifully green and thick and has sprung up several inches, while the surrounding grass has but just begun. I have entrusted a most important matter to you, which I firmly believe will prove of essential benefit to the human race. I should not wish what I have stated to be brought into conversation, for should anything untoward happen, I should be made, particularly by my medical brethren, the subject of ridicule, for I am the mark they all shoot at.
That's a wine cooler, and he had an impressive collection of wines in his cellar too.
So your book is out at old in our town, nor shan't neither, if I can help it.
There nibbling at thistles stand Jim, Joe and Mary. On their foreheads, oh horrible, crumpled horns bud. Their Tom with a tail and poor William all hairy, reclined in a corner, are chewing the cud. He contrived in a short time to accumulate a series of specimens illustrative of comparative anatomy and natural history, which would have formed a museum of no inconsiderable magnitude.
Looks like the French had their own issues with Jenner's vaccine.
He contrived in a short time to accumulate a series of specimens illustrative of comparative anatomy and natural history, which would have formed a museum of no inconsiderable magnitude.
Edward Jenner, physician, scientist and Fellow of the Royal Society. Edward Jenner, physician, scientist and Fellow of the Royal Society.
His attention was drawn forcibly to the nature of cowpox while Jenner was yet a youth. A young countrywoman came to seek advice, and the subject of smallpox was mentioned in her presence. She immediately observed, "I cannot take that disease, for I have had cowpox." The observation of the migration of birds were read before the Royal Society on November 27th in the year Jenner passed away. They were presented to Sir Humphrey Davy by the Reverend G.C. Jenner, who had the peculiar happiness to accompany his uncle in most of the investigations of the phenomena of migration.
Sarah Nelms, a dairy maid at a farmer's near this place, was infected with the cowpox from her master's cows in May 1796. A large pustulous sore and the usual symptoms accompanying the disease were produced in consequence.
The Right Honourable George Rose MP. He helped Jenner create the National Vaccine Establishment. Edward Jenner and his parliamentary friends seeing off the anti-vaccinationists.
Phipps went through the cowpox apparently in a regular and satisfactory manner, but the most agitating part of the trial still remained to be performed. It was needful to ascertain whether he was secure from the contagion of smallpox.
Are you in good health, James? It's been 8 weeks now since you received the cowpox.
Yes, sir.
So now we must discover if you are secure from the contagion of smallpox. We will use the lancet like before. Are you ready?
The freedom of the city of Dublin. Freedom anywhere sounds good to me.
Dr. Jenner set a great value upon these letters. They were carefully preserved in a cover which was inscribed in his own handwriting. Letters from Mr. Hunter to E. Jenner, an honour which he was not always in the habit of conferring on more dignified communications.
Jenner was a student of Hunter's for his medical training in London. Clearly they became great friends.
His eldest son had a feeble constitution and other infirmities which rendered it inexpedient to send him to a public school. A domestic tutor was procured who was little older than his pupil, but though tender in years, he was old in wisdom and knowledge.
Master Morgan must have been a bright spark then.
He was lying in the last stage of pulmonary consumption. He had repeated hemorrhages from the lungs and was then evidently approaching his end. I was introduced into the sick room, and there for the first time I saw Mrs. Jenner, the anxious and constant attendant of her dying child.
The doctor's eldest son died of consumption in 1810 at the age of just 21. Another cupboard. I'll have to try a different way. That's just a cupboard. There's no way through here. Another cupboard. I'll have to try a different way. Nice landscape. Nice landscape.
Selected poems by the late John Dawes Worgan of Bristol, who died on the 25th of July 1809, aged 19 years.
So the young tutor died of consumption the year before the doctor's son.
I feel greatly obliged to everyone who attempts to console me in my present affliction. But you, who know so much of the human mind, are convinced how vain are these friendly efforts. I had no conception till it happened that the gash would have been so deep, but God's will be done. I feel greatly obliged to everyone who attempts to console me in my present affliction. But you, who know so much of the human mind, are convinced how vain are these friendly efforts. I had no conception till it happened that the gash would have been so deep, but God's will be done.
He was lying in the last stage of pulmonary consumption. He had repeated hemorrhages from the lungs and was then evidently approaching his end. I was introduced into the sick room, and there for the first time I saw Mrs. Jenner, the anxious and constant attendant of her dying child.
That's Oxford, where the young captain studied.
Dr. Wickham, who was one of the travelling fellows of the University of Oxford, was in Paris when the command for the detention of the English was issued. The committee recommended that Dr. Jenner should immediately avail himself of his great celebrity in France and directly appeal to the Emperor.
Sire, having made a discovery of which all nations acknowledge the beneficial effects, I presume with great deference to request a favour from your Imperial Majesty. My humble request is to permit 2 of my friends, both men of science and literature, to return to England. One, Mr. William Thomas Williams, residing at Nancy; the other, Dr. Wickham, at present at Geneva. I have the honour to be, with the most profound deference and respect, Your Imperial Majesty's most obedient and humble servant, E.J.
Some kind of military manoeuvres.
At the end of 1809, Napoleon issued a decree that 100,000 francs should be at the disposal of the Minister of the Interior for encouraging and propagating vaccination throughout the Empire.
Case 22. From the arm of this girl, matter was taken and inserted April 12th into the arms of John Marklove, 1 year and a half old; Robert F. Jenner, 11 months old; Mary Peed, 5 years old; and Mary James, 6 years old.
Robert Jenner. So he vaccinated his own son at just 11 months old. Robert Jenner was a member of the militia, but he wasn't old enough to have fought in the wars against France.
The alternative presented by the French government to His Majesty, in language the most peremptory and menacing, was the evacuation of Malta, or the renewal of war. His Majesty is actuated solely by a sense of what is due to the honour of his crown, and the interests of his people, and by an anxious desire to obstruct the further progress of a system which may prove fatal to every part of the civilized world.
Case 22. From the arm of this girl, matter was taken and inserted April 12th into the arms of John Marklove, 1 year and a half old; Robert F. Jenner, 11 months old; Mary Peed, 5 years old; and Mary James, 6 years old.
An unfortunate cuckoo, apparently. William and Mary. She's the queen that died of smallpox. William and Mary. She's the queen that died of smallpox.
Dear Jenner, your paper on the cuckoo has been read. passed the council and is in print in the Philosophical Transactions. I spoke to Sir Joseph Banks about your wish to be a Fellow of the Royal Society. Sir Joseph has not the least objection, and will give us all his assistance. But he thinks the paper had better be first printed and delivered, and let the people rest a little upon it. This will put off the certificate till the beginning of the next winter. I am, dear sir, your most obedient servant, John Hunter.
The doctor's previous education nor his habits gave him a relish of any of the branches of pure science. He seemed to have a peculiar horror of arithmetical questions, and he exclaimed that he would rather look for an hour at a mite through a microscope than have his time taken up with such things.
I selected a healthy boy, about 8 years old, for the purpose of inoculation for the cowpox. The matter was taken from a sore on the hand of a dairymaid who was infected by her master's cows. It was inserted on the 14th of May, 1796, into the arm of the boy by means of 2 superficial incisions, barely penetrating the cutis, each about ½ an inch long.
I opened the thorax of a dog between 2 ribs and introduced the thermometer. Then I put some lint into the wound to keep it from healing, so that the thorax might inflame. But before I had time to try it again, from the hurry of business, my dog died. If these experiments will amuse you, I should be glad that they were made. But take care you do not break your thermometer in the dog's chest. John Hunter.
The doctor's previous education nor his habits gave him a relish of any of the branches of pure science.
Mr. Jenner, after the most advantageous and well-attested success of the vaccine in England, I hastened to imitate this example by introducing it into the pious establishments under my direction. I am pleased to report its success and show my gratitude to one who has provided this service to humanity. The motive engages me to offer you the attached ring as a testimony of the sentiments of esteem and goodwill with which I am most affectionate. Marie.
Never seen one of them before. It's got a face like a timepiece.
Smoking, I am sure, is harmless if used in moderation. A man who has a pipe at his command always has a soothing companion, independently of its salutary influence on good health.
I can't afford to smoke no more, but I reckon I feel better for stopping. Another painting by Stephen Jenner. Look what he's put in the background.
Dr. Jenner's discovery is unquestionably the greatest discovery ever made for the preservation of the human species. It is proved that in these United Kingdoms alone, 45,000 persons die annually of the smallpox. But throughout the world, not a second is struck by the hand of time when a victim is not sacrificed at the altar of that most horrible of all disorders. I shall therefore move that a sum not less than £10,000 be granted, but when I do this, I declare I do not think it sufficient. If the House should think it right to adopt any larger sum, I shall hold myself free to vote for it.
It was his intention that it should have first appeared before the public in the Transactions of the Royal Society. When the subject was laid before the President, Jenner was given to understand that he should be cautious and prudent, and ought not to risk his reputation by presenting to the learned body anything which appeared so much at variance with established knowledge. The painful disappointment which he experienced caused this design to be abandoned, and the work appeared as a separate publication.
Probably some sort of bird you'd see down on the Severn Estuary.
Mrs. Jenner's health became evidently more impaired. She was so slender, so attenuated, and so much deprived of all vigour of constitution by protracted illness. I visited her in Cheltenham the night before she expired, and when she was in full expectation of the fatal event. She had long been preparing for her final account, but her death may be considered as the signal for Dr. Jenner's final removal from public life. He retired immediately to Berkeley, and never, except for a day or two, quitted again. He was below the middle stature, his hair dark, and a little inclining to curl, and it was observed at his death that he was not the least grey. He was rather near-sighted, but never made use of glasses. His dress was black, a large collar to the coat, and loose, low trousers, the dress of the day.
Shadow portraits were very fashionable, but not worth much.
She was elegant in her manners, accomplished in her mind, and possessed an understanding of great vigour. She had been an invalid for a considerable time before her marriage, and never enjoyed robust health.
Both his wife and son were taken by consumption. After all he did for medicine, that must have been hard to cope with. That's a very distinguished portrait of the Doctor.
I avail myself of this occasion to render you my portion of the tribute of gratitude due to you from the whole human family. Medicine has never before produced any single improvement of such utility. You have erased from the calendar of human afflictions one of its greatest. Yours is the comfortable reflection that mankind can never forget that you have lived. Future nations will know by history only that the loathsome smallpox has existed, and by you has been exterminated. Accept the most fervent wishes for your health and happiness, and assurances of the greatest respect and consideration. Thomas Jefferson.